Let's get started. Welcome to tonight's presentation on the wide world of beer. I'm Andrea Sato, and I work at the library on adult programs, including this one. So before I introduce our speaker tonight, let me tell you about a few of our upcoming programs because we have a lot of good things coming up. Tomorrow at 6:30, Robin Hoffman of Artscapades will be back to talk about important works of art and where to find them in museums across the US. Wednesday night this week, Michael Crystal is leading another wine tasting called Not Just Another Wine Tasting. Very limited attendance, but currently at this moment, there are 2 spots left. But if you're interested, please read the details because there's audience participation in that. Next Tuesday night, our film historian Greg Blank is back to talk about the career and films of Billy Crystal. And Wednesday and Thursday next week, we partner with the League of Women Voters for local election candidate forums. So we have much more coming up. So please take a look at our website or our e-newsletters. So now, Gregg Glaser is publisher and editor of Modern Distillery Age, a weekly trade magazine covering the spirits business. Previously, he was editor-in-chief of Yankee Brew News, a bi-monthly consumer newspaper covering craft beer in the Northeast. He was a columnist for Modern Brewery Age, a trade magazine for the beer business, and news editor for All About Beer magazine, a consumer magazine. Gregg conducts monthly tasting panels for Modern Distillery Age, and since 1996, he's been the producer of the Great International Beer, Cider, Mead, and Sake Competition, the largest such professional competition on the East Coast. So please welcome Gregg Glaser.
Thank you, Andrea. That's a wonderful little introduction. I couldn't have done better if I'd written it myself. Oh, actually, I did write it. That's true. I just remembered that. You don't get it, but I get to drink light beer tonight. So there you go. This, I hope you are all aware that this is a dry speaking event. If you think you're going to be getting served beer, no, the library couldn't handle it with so many people in the room and all the serving and pouring. So this is going to be a dry presentation. Not in terms of the content, I hope. I hope you enjoy the little bit of information I give you about the history of beer throughout the ages. And I can talk to you a little bit about styles of beer, but it's primarily not a beer 101. It's more beer history. So that brings us to the very topic of the conversation, the history of beer. Who invented beer? And we all know there has to have been somebody who invented beer in the very beginning. Couldn't just appear out of nowhere. And as we all know, Alley-oop, he invented beer. It's a stated fact. You can go to any research institution in the world. Alley-oop is listed as the man who invented beer after he was kicking dinosaurs. Actually, that might not have been the case, but it's a good probability. Most archaeologists and historians who study early humankind, they think that people stopped becoming nomadic and hunter-gatherers to plant crops. This is the so-called 10,000 year ago agricultural revolution. But why did they do this? Well, they had been harvesting wild grains and using them to eat, make porridges and cereals. So one hypothesis is that one day, a bowl of this porridge, this goopy cereal, was left out for a long time, maybe overnight. And the next time somebody came to it, it was bubbling. And of course, now we know that was fermentation. Wild yeasts had come in and were eating the sugars that were in that cereal. And a byproduct of fermentation is alcohol. So this person decided, well, we can't let this go to waste. They would drink it, eat it, whatever that bowl of porridge or cereal was, and they felt good afterwards. It was something different. So the thought is maybe people decided, oh, I want to replicate this. This sounds like something good. We like this. So did humankind stop hunting and gathering and settle down and create the agricultural revolution in order to grow crops to eat? Or was it to grow grains to make beer? This is up for debate seriously in academic institutions. And if we fast forward a few tens of thousands of years from that happy accident, the cradle of civilization we're all taught in school is the Tigris and Euphrates Valley in Mesopotamia and Samaria were the ancient civilizations. So this is the Middle East. Cradle of civilization, meaning many civilizations were founded there. They were agricultural. There were a lot of crops being grown. And these stone tablets are called the Ninkasi tablets. They were unearthed. And Ninkasi was the goddess of the harvest. And once these stone tablets were deciphered and people could figure out what they were saying, it turns out it was a poem to the goddess Ninkasi. But it wasn't just a poem saying how wonderful she was and she gives us the grains that we eat. It is a recipe for how to make beer. This is what they found out. Step by step, it's understood from this stone tablet. So early written records of beer go back to the Sumerians. And then it spread all over the ancient world. The Egyptians also, prolific beer makers, and excavations of pyramids and other sites in ancient Egypt in the areas where they knew cooking was going on, and they all these things from pots and vessels and scraping off little bits and under the microscope and modern technology in the lab, they found evidence of beer making in terms of the ingredients that were being used. Even in China. In Samaria, I don't want to miss out on some of these quotes I have for you. In Samaria, 5500 BC to 800 BC, besides those Ninkasi tablets, there were two sayings that I've come across in my research on the history of beer. No children without sex, no drunkenness without beer. And in ancient Egypt, the mouth of a perfectly happy man is filled with beer. And this is Confucius, who we all recognize, of course. He said, an oppressive government is more to be feared than a tiger or a beer. It spread into the ancient world of the Greeks and the Romans, the Greeks coming first with their civilization. Sophocles said, talking about a moderate diet for people, I recommend bread, meat, vegetables, and beer. Julius Caesar, beer, a high and mighty liquor. Now, in the ancient world, there was really more wine than there was beer because the grapes grew so well in that climate. There turns out that there's a beer belt, a beer line in Europe once we get to that part of the history. Whereas in the north of Europe, grapes are not growing very well. So as we all know, if we're wine drinkers, you're not getting many wines historically. Nowadays, wine is being made everywhere, of course. But historically, wine was made in the south of Europe, and in the north of Europe, it would be more beer and or cider. Now, the ancient, the Norsemen who conquered many parts of Europe, the first recorded mention of the word ale. Now, I've only used the word beer so far. I'm going to get into some of this nomenclature in a second because there's beer and there's lager and there's ale and then there's all the subcategories that we all know about. The first recorded mention of the word ale occurred around 950 AD in the Old Norse Alvismal. Any Norwegians here in the room who will know this by heart? Okay, I guess not. It was the song of the All-Wise, or the words of the All-Wise. And it says that, ale it is called among men, and among gods, beer. Now, as we get into the Middle Ages, the so-called Dark Ages first, and the fall of the Roman Empire, beer making and winemaking as well in Europe was primarily on a monastic level. There were not guilds yet. There weren't tradesmen making beer or wine in the South. It was primarily monks, and it was in the monastery. In Germany, there's an unknown German monk saying, he who drinks beer sleeps well. He who sleeps well cannot sin. He who does not sin goes to heaven. Amen. And Saint Arnoldus, he was from 1534 to 1562, he said, "From man's sweat and God's love, beer came into the world. It is my design to die in the brew house." And the last monastic quote I found from 612, Saint Columbanus, "Let ale be placed to my mouth when I am expiring, that when the choirs of angels come, they may say, 'Be God propitious to this drinker.'" Now, in the city of Danzig on the Baltic coast, up in the northern part of Europe in the 11th century, there was a city edict passed by the then city council. Whoever makes a poor beer is transferred to the dunghill. Now, this is a field of grains. Friar Tuck in Robin Hood said, "This is grain which any fool can eat, but for which the Lord has intended more divine form of consumption. Let us give praise to our Maker and glory to his bounty by learning about beer." Now, beer. What is beer? Beer is the term for any fermented beverage that comes from a grain. Primarily, it's barley. You can use other grains, wheat and spelt and rye and rice. It's primarily barley. This is a field of barley. That's the primary ingredient, which the raw barley is transformed through a process called malting, and then the brewer uses that malt to steeping it in hot water. Water, 95% of beer, maybe the percentage is a little more or a little less than that. It's mostly water. And the water is very critical for beer making around the world. Major brewing centers in Europe and then transferred to the United States in our era. But historically, brewing centers formed in towns and cities where there was a plentiful supply of clean, fresh water. And different types of water will create different types of beer styles that we now know, and different flavors and tastes, whether it's rich in minerals or weak in minerals, soft water, hard water, things of this sort. So water, the most plentiful ingredient in beer. Then the grains that I mentioned, these field of grains. And then hops are the seasoning agent in beer. You've heard of hops. And hops are a vining plant. They grow 18, 20 feet tall. They put out little hop cones that are really the flower of the plant. But they provide several things to beer. They provide aroma. They provide taste and flavor and bitterness. So they are the seasoning agent for a brewer. So a brewer has water, grains for sweetness, and then hops for a seasoning. Think of it as the salt and pepper and spices and so forth that the brewer uses in the brew house. That's what hops do. And the final ingredient would be yeast. And it used to be for centuries and centuries and thousands of years, just wild yeast floating in the air that would inoculate the unfermented beer and create the fermentation process. But as time went on and scientific advances progressed, yeast could be kept in a lab in very specific strains of yeast. And to this day, there are yeast banks in universities around the world where if a brewery perhaps had a major accident or their yeast was infected, they could go to this lab and they could get their own strain of yeast back. So as I speak for the rest of this talk about different terms that might come up, beer is, if you think of it in terms of an organizational chart, beer is the word up at the top. There are two categories. There are ales and there are lagers. These are the two big subheads of the types of beer in the world. And under that are all the names that you might be familiar with. Obviously, ales. You have India Pale Ales and Pale Ales and Brown Ales. There are mild ales. There's porter and stout. They fall in the ale category. And under the lager category, you'll find beers that are called just lager or pilsner, which is a common big name, Bock beers and Dunkel beers, if you've ever heard of those. That's the broad category of what beer is all about. This is a map of Augsburg in Germany, and in the 13th century, they passed a law. The selling of bad beer is a crime against Christian love. Now, the Germans were very serious about their beer. Now, Germany wasn't a united country until the 1860s, but many different city-states and regions of Germany were independent for centuries. But they had a common language and a common culture. And in Bavaria, in the south, it was a very important center of power and political power and military power and wealthy. They passed the first, as far as I know from my research, the very first ever consumer protection law for beer. It was also a law to protect the people who were making it, and the merchants and so forth, and the brewers. But the German beer law in 1466, the Reinheitsgebot, said that beer could only be made with certain ingredients. And they were trying to get those ingredients down to just the water and the grains and the hops and the yeast. Of course, they didn't know about yeast yet then scientifically, but they added that in later. But part of their laws said that beer brewers shall sell no beer to the citizens unless it be 3 weeks old. To the foreigners, they may knowingly sell younger beer. Martin Luther. Martin Luther said, "It is better to think of church in the alehouse than to think of the alehouse in church." Here we have Sir Walter Raleigh. "The first draught serveth for health, the second for pleasure, the third for shame, the fourth for madness." And good old William Shakespeare, you would imagine he would have worked beer into a few of his plays. In A Winter's Tale, "For a quart of ale is a dish for a king." In King Henry V, "I would give all my fame for a pot of ale and safety." And in Two Gentlemen of Verona, "Blessings of your heart, you brew good ale." Now we move over to the New World, and we're going to pop back and forth between this part of the world and the old world for a little bit with some of these people who have worked beer into their sayings and world history. The Mayflower. This is a rendition of the Mayflower. And in the logbook of December 16th, 1620, "We could not now take time for further search or consideration, our victuals being much spent, especially our beer." Now, in the old world, people did not trust water from rivers and streams, because if you're in a village on one part of the stream, the guys and the women upstream, they were putting all kinds of nasty stuff into the river in their village, human waste included. So you drink the water at your end of the stream, you're going to get sick. And so far, the chain just kept continuing. So the Europeans who drank either wine in the south or beer up in the north, they were drinking fermented beverages. They might not have known the science behind it, but the alcohol was a natural preservative. It was killing some of the bugs they were getting out of the streams, which was their only source of water, unless they also had a well. But the wells could be contaminated too. So when the first Europeans came to our shores, they didn't trust this pristine water that we had all over New England. Of course, we know that would have been wonderful for them to drink. They would not have gotten sick. However, they didn't trust it. So on the Mayflower, they had barrels and barrels of beer, which is what they were drinking as their main source of liquid as they made the Atlantic voyage. They were off course. They were supposed to go to Virginia. They ended up in Massachusetts. It was late in the season. It was December. It was getting cold. So the sailors on board, they wanted to get home, but they landed too late to go back across the Atlantic. So everyone had to live for the winter with the beer that was left to them. This is John Ray. He is the father of English natural history, 1628 to 1705. He wrote, "He that buys land buys many stones. He that buys flesh buys many bones. He that buys eggs buys many shells, but he that buys good ale buys nothing else." This is John Churchill. He was the first Duke of Marlborough, 1650 to 1722. He said, "No soldier can properly fight unless he is properly fed on beef and beer." Christian Reuter, 1665 to 1712, he was a German writer of satiric fiction, and he said, "It is a perfect brew that makes you feel exactly like preaching a sermon." We can't leave out our friends les Français. This is Voltaire. Voltaire said, "Englishmen are like their own beer. frothy on top, dregs on the bottom, the middle excellent. And good old Ben Franklin, you know he wrote about everything and had a comment on everything under the sun. He said that beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy. And Sam Adams, you know, there's a beer. You ever hear that beer? That's, yeah. He's still around making that beer. He's been around for a long time. He said, let no man thirst for good beer. Good old Thomas Jefferson. All right, is that Jefferson? I went too fast. That's Jefferson. He said, beer, if drank with moderation, softens the temper, cheers the spirit, and promotes health. And he also said, I wish to see this beverage, beer, become common instead of the whiskey, which kills 1/3 of our citizens and ruins their families. And that was true. During colonial times, during revolutionary times, and right after the revolution with independence, alcoholism was rampant in the United States in the 13 original colonies. People were drinking a lot of whiskey and rum, and they were getting remarkably drunk all the time during the day, at work, and so forth. It was ruining families. The people who founded this country, the merchants, the businessmen, and the civic leaders, they weren't all anti-alcohol, but they wanted to reduce drunkenness so that productivity would pick up and this new country could actually have a mercantile base, and also for the health of the citizens. So they were promoting beer, which was a lot less in alcohol than whiskey. Most beer can be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9% in those days, but whiskey, of course, is going to be 40, 45, 50% alcohol by volume. A huge difference. And there wasn't a lot of wine. Certainly wine wasn't being made here, and wine imported would have been very, very expensive. So beer was being promoted by the people who founded this country. This is Alexander Hamilton. You might know he wrote a musical about himself. It was on Broadway recently. He said, the moralizing tendency and salubrious nature of fermented liquors, beer, ale, porter, and cider, recommend them to a serious consideration, and particularly in our country. William Blake, he was an English poet and artist, 1757 to 1827. He said, a good local pub has much in common with a church, except that a pub is warmer and there's more conversation. Sidney Smith was an English writer and an Anglican clergyman. He said, what two ideas are more inseparable than beer and Britannia? And Washington Irving, back over on our side of the aisle, he said, they who drink beer will think beer. And Ralph Waldo Emerson, God made yeast as well as dough and loves fermentation just as dearly as he loves vegetation. This is George Borrow. He was an English author, 1803 to 1881. He wrote in one of his books, he is not deserving the name of Englishman who speaketh against ale, that is, good ale. And Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, at all feasts where ale was strongest, sat the merry monarch longest, first to come and last to go. Good old Abraham Lincoln. He said, I am a firm believer in the people. If given the truth, they can be depended upon to meet any national crisis. The great point is to bring them the real facts and beer. Walt Whitman. There is to me something profoundly affecting in large masses of men following the lead of those who do not believe in men and beer. And good old Queen Victoria. Give my people plenty of beer, good beer, and cheap beer, and you will have no revolution among them. Charles Stewart Calverley, 1831 to 1884, English writer. Oh, beer, oh, Hodgson, Guinness, Alsop, Bass, names that should be on every infant's tongue. Now, in England, which was, along with Germany, I would say England, Great Britain, but more England than Scotland or Ireland even, England and Germany were the powerhouses on the European continent of beer brewing. Belgium is a wonderful country for making beer, but not nearly as large as these other two countries in terms of population and numbers of breweries. England was known for the style of beer known as ale. When I talked earlier about how there's ale and there's lager as the two big categories of beer making. And one of the differences here between the two is that ales generally ferment from the yeast that inoculates the unfermented liquid. It will ferment at an ambient temperature, 50, 55 degrees or 60 degrees. In other words, cellar temperatures or coolish temperatures out in the open. Whereas lagers, that yeast is specific to liking to work with temperatures that are much colder. But there was no such thing as refrigeration until 1868, when the German scientist Carl von Linde invented the first refrigeration unit in Munich. And guess who his first buyers were of this equipment? Well, were the brewers, because they were already somewhat lagering or making a lager style of beer by putting their unfermented beer in cold cellars or deep underground or in caves. So they were getting a constant cold temperature to create this other kind of beer flavor and taste, which became known as lager. In fact, the word lager in German means to store something, to put it in a shed, to put it away for a while. That's what lagering means in brewing today. It means letting the beer sit for a while before you're ready to put it in a keg or a bottle or a can. But the lagers needed these cold temperatures. Now, the English were making styles of beer that were ales with what I described as more of an ambient cellar type of temperature. So we had Bass. Bass ale was famous. They were making porters and stouts. And in fact, we're probably all familiar with Guinness Stout. That's a very internationally known brand name. And there are other types of stouts that are made as well. But before there was stout, there was a type of beer in London called a porter. And a porter was a dark ale. But then brewers started making, in London, not in Ireland, but in London, they started making a stronger version of porters, and they called it a stout porter. Of course, the adjective stout meaning stout, hearty and bigger and fuller. And it became popular. And it made its way over to Ireland, where Arthur Guinness started his brewery making porters at first, and then he moved into making mostly just stouts. So to bust the bubble of any Irish men or women in the room, Guinness Stout's really an English beer. There you go. This is good old Mark Twain. Mark Twain said, when defining the word demagogue, it's a vessel containing beer and other liquids. And this is Colonel Adolphus Busch. He lived from 1839 to 1913. And as you know, Busch is part of Busch Bavarian and Anheuser-Busch, one of the largest breweries in the world. It's been since bought by the Brazilians, but that's a whole nother business story. And he said that you can only drink 30 or 40 glasses of beer in a day, no matter how rich you are. Now, the German story of beer in the United States is very interesting and very important for our beer history in this country, because the first people that came here were primarily from the UK. Now, the French were over here too, but they were primarily north of us, or they were out in Louisiana or in that part of the country, and they weren't making beer so much as the first settlers here after the Revolution. The brewing industry took off, because we were no longer importing beer from England at very high rates of cost and taxation. Now, we were making ales. These, first of all, there was no refrigeration unit, and it was a style of beer that everyone knew about. The Germans came over in a massive wave of immigration to our country, to Canada, to Mexico, and some other places in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s. And they brought with them this new style of beer that was very popular in Germany and Austria at that time, which was the lager style of beer, the style of beer that was being made with cold fermentation. And a lot of Germans settled in the Midwest of the United States. And to this day, we have so many historic German-named breweries which have either gone out of business or been bought and sold. But we've got Pabst, and we've got Busch, of course, and Schlitz, and some of these other names. And so the Germans changed the scope of beer in the United States. Ale production, which was really centered in New England, started to fall off in sales in terms of the popularity of this new style of beer, which was called the lager. And there were various reasons for this. It was just people's tastes. They liked it. It was a little lighter in taste. It was certainly lighter in color. Most of the lagers were using malts that were not roasted so much, so the color of the beer was blonde and golden. Glass production was finally coming into mass production use, so it used to be glass was only for the rich and the nobility, and now anyone could have glass. So it looked nicer to have this gold beer in your glass than maybe some of the darker ales that had been popular before. So ales that were amber in color and porters and stouts that were black in color fell off in favor of these blonde, clear, very well filtered beers called lagers. Now it's all thanks to in the Industrial Revolution with Carl von Linde and the refrigeration machine and this wave of German and Austrian, mostly German emigration to the United States. Haven't said anything about Australia yet because there's not much to say in this talk, but I did find this. It was a dispatch from the colony of New South Wales in 1854. Of doctors and medicines, we have in plenty more than enough. What you may, for the love of God, is send us some large quantity of beer. Now, this man on the left, he is Emile Verhaeren. 1855 to 1916. He was a Flemish writer. So I have to get in one quote at least from Belgium, the Flemish part of the country, the northern part of the country. He said, in Belgium, the magistrate has the dignity of a prince, but by Bacchus it is true that the brewer is king. This is Kaiser Wilhelm II. He said, give me a woman who loves beer and I will conquer the world. Rudyard Kipling said, heirs to English women and a quart of English beer. Henry Lawson, we're back in Australia just for a moment. He was an author and poet, 1867 to 1922. Beer makes you feel the way you ought to feel without beer. I like that one. And Thomas Mann, the German writer, beer soothes the upset soul. Well, now we get to a dark chapter in American history. At least I think so. And if you're here interested in beer at all, you probably are not in favor of Prohibition either. Prohibition, the great experiment in this country, 1919, 1931, 32. It was a national law, federal law. Some states had gone dry, some parts of states had gone dry before that. There had been anti-alcohol groups in the United States for many years. The initials there are the Women's Christian Temperance Union. This is a trade magazine picture for the hops industry. And they became federal law, as I said, in the beginning of 1920. Donald Robert Perry Marquis, I like the fact that he has four names, 1878 to 1937. He was a New York newspaper columnist and humorist. He wrote, when Prohibition was put into law, Prohibition makes you want to cry in your beer and denies you the beer to cry into. Now, there's a little ditty I came across in my research over the years about Prohibition. It might have been a song, it might have just been something that was chanted. When I've given these talks before, I've just said the words. Then a few times I've just sort of sing-song chanted it. Once I tried kind of singing it. I don't know the tune for it. But I have to ask you, this is the audience participation part of the evening. Do you want me to do one of those, or would you like me to play it on the ukulele? thought maybe you might pick that up. Okay, well, I don't really know what the tune was, so I just put it to some little blues tune. Mother's in the kitchen, washing out the jugs. I said, Mother's in the kitchen, she's washing out the jugs. Sister's in the pantry, she's filling up the suds. Sister's in the pantry, filling up the suds. Father's in the cellar, oh, Father's in the cellar, mixing up the hops. And Johnny, little Johnny, he's on the front step. He's just watching for the cops. All right, thank you. That's the end of the musical part of the evening. We'll get back to dry humor next. And dry it is. Roosevelt. He signed the legislation that repealed prohibition. That was the 21st Amendment. And one of those White House signing ceremonies, you know, we've all seen pictures. The president uses a lot of pens and gives them out to everybody in the room. Well, when he finished the ceremony and he signed the law and alcohol was legal to sell and make again, he said, I think this would be a good time for a beer. This is, I got a quote from an Irish novelist, 1937, Patrick McGinley. There's nothing as heartening as the sight of an empty pub in the morning, the shelves full and everything spick and span before the barbarian hordes come in. Them that drinks bottles spoil the look of the shelves, but draft is a different story. You never see the barrel going down. Now, we all know who this is. This is Winston Churchill. A lot of good quotes from this man. I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, sweat, and beer. He said most people hate the taste of beer to begin with. However, it's just a prejudice. Lady Astor, she was a social reformer. She once said to Winston Churchill, Sir, if you were my husband, I would poison your drink. And he replied, Madam, if you were my wife, I would drink it. And there she is, herself, Lady Astor, 1879 to 1964. She was actually born here and then married into English nobility. She was a social reformer, as I mentioned a moment ago. She once ended a temperance lecture. She was totally against alcohol. She said to her audience, I would rather commit adultery than drink a glass of beer. And someone in the back of the crowd yelled, who wouldn't? Okay, we're back to les Français. Charles de Gaulle, le président, the general. He said, evangelical perfection cannot be conceived of without a strong dose of egoism, pride, toughness, and beer. A.A. Milne. Of beer, an enthusiast has said that it could never be bad, but that some brands might be better than others. Okay, did I skip one there? This is a very delicate little button. There we go. Louis Untermeyer, American poet and anthologist, 1885, 1977. He said, life, alas, is very drear. Up with the glass, down with the beer. Very delicate little button all of a sudden. But before we get to Ike, let's go to this one up here. Won't go backwards. All right. The one before that, I had a whole bunch of religious icons up on the screen. Harvey Allen, he was a U.S. historian, said, religions change, beer and wine remain. And here we are with Dwight, Ike, better known as Ike. He said, some people wanted champagne and caviar when they should have had beer and hot dogs. Mm-hmm. All right, Andrea, the machine stopped going forwards and backwards. Yeah, all right. Well, the same button I've been pressing is not making them go. Let's try this. What's that? Yeah. Try that. Yeah. Ah, there we go. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry for that. Okay. Henry Miller. All right. This is not my computer. Okay. Why, I see it here. Why don't I see it there? All right. Well, we worked that out. Any questions so far? Somebody has a question. Yeah, go ahead.
When did they start putting beer in bottles versus?
Bottles probably came about around the turn of the century. Glass, I mentioned earlier about glass manufacturing. Okay, doesn't have an answer. Okay, glass manufacturing came about in massive quantities in the late 1800s, part of the Industrial Revolution story and so forth. And so bottles came about maybe 20, 30 years after that. Cans, I thought you were going to ask about cans, because cans came about in around 1935. We have an IT man coming up here. There you go. It's all yours. All right.
Wait a minute.
No, I'll take questions while you do that. Any other questions while we work this out? Yeah.
You want to tell some of these Okay.
Oh, yeah. Some folks in here might not know, or maybe you do. It depends. Wilton, prohibition was repealed in the United States, but states and even municipalities and counties within states could stay dry if they wanted to. So Wilton was dry for many years. I moved into Wilton in, I lost track of time now, 1980 perhaps, and Wilton was dry. Wilton was dry then. We didn't get it back yet, did we? What? Help is on its way. I'll keep talking. All right. Wilton was dry when I moved in, and it was on the ballot for a number of years in Wilton to allow alcohol sales. So all the many years I lived here, there were really no restaurants, because restaurants make a lot of their money off of alcohol sales. It's a big markup, as those of you who know. If you buy a bottle of wine in the store and buy that bottle in a store, it's 2-3 times as expensive. So. Okay, I'll let you get me back on screen, please. So Wilton had it on the ballot for a number of years. It kept being voted down, and Wilton could. Look at that. Thank you. All right. So what happened was, I remember once I was over at Stop and Shop years ago when it was on the ballot, and there was a table up with people promoting the passage of this new law in Wilton to allow alcohol sales here. And the people who were promoting it were having their teenagers, man and woman, the table. Wow, that was a problem, because people say, you've got teenagers, underage drinkers, promoting alcohol use. Well, as you all know, if you live here, or even if you don't, if you travel through here, now there are restaurants in town, and that's because they all came in right after alcohol sales were allowed. All right, so we had Ike up there, and I told you what Ike said. Let's see. Here we go. Henry Miller. Henry Miller said, keep your libraries, your penal institutions, your insane asylums. Give me beer. You think man needs rule? He needs beer. The world does not need morals. It needs beer. The souls of men have been fed with indigestibles, but the soul could make use of beer. There you go. That's Henry Miller. And Al Capone, good-looking dude, isn't he? Isn't he? He just looks so sweet. He said, the public is a guy who wants a shot and a glass of beer. That's what he wants. And Hemingway, he made this remark after David O. Selznick, a big producer in Hollywood, in 1957, did a remake of A Farewell to Arms. As those of you who know about Hemingway, it was one of his books. Hemingway saw the movie, and he said, you write a book like that you're fond of over the years, then you see that happen to it. It's like pissing in your father's beer. John Steinbeck said, "There is nothing in the world like the first taste of beer." George Orwell, over in England, he said, "The puritanical nonsense of excluding children and therefore, to some extent, women from pubs has turned these places into mere boozing shops instead of the family gathering places they ought to be." And this is a British historian, A.J.P. Taylor. "In my opinion, most of the great men of the past were only there for the beer." This is an American poet by the name of John Ciardi. "Fermentation and civilization are inseparable." Mickey Spillane, the author. You ever read one of his books? Mike Hammer was his detective, a hard-boiled detective. Mickey Spillane, he wrote a series of those books. He said, "Mike Hammer, who was the detective, drinks beer because I can't spell cognac." Anne Sexton, American poet. "God has a brown voice as soft and as full as beer." This is Hugh Hood. He was a Canadian author. I don't think we've had anything from Canada so far. So here's to our Canadian neighbors. "Nothing ever tasted better than a cold beer on a beautiful afternoon with nothing to look forward to than more of the same." Kurt Vonnegut. From his book Hocus Pocus in 1990, he wrote, "Beer, of course, is actually a depressant, but poor people will never stop hoping otherwise." And good old Frank Zappa, he said, "You can't be a real country unless you have a beer and an airline. It helps if you have some kind of football team or some nuclear weapons, but at the very least, you need a beer." This is Hunter Thompson, Hunter S. Thompson. Can't leave out his S. A journalist, writer, essayist. He said when he was covering the U.S. war against Iraq, "Cover a war in a place where you can't drink a beer or talk to a woman? Hell no." And he said, "There is an ancient Celtic axiom that says good people drink beer, which is true then as now. Just look around you in any public barroom and you will quickly see bad people drink bad beer." Think about it. This is a baseball player for the Detroit Tigers, Mickey Lolich. He said, "All the fat guys watch me and say to their wives, 'See, there's a fat guy doing okay. Bring me another beer.'" And David Rains Wallace, an American author. "Fermentation may have been a greater discovery than fire." Oh, how'd we jump way up there so fast? That makes no sense. All right, get back to where we were. Arnold, good old Arnold. He said, "Milk is for babies. When you grow up, you have to drink beer." Still on fire, okay. That was Arnold. Stephen King. Well, I see it on my screen, but not on yours. All right. I'm just going to say it then, rather than bring the guy back. This is just a picture of Stephen King. He said, "I work until beer o'clock." Still on fire, huh? The German newspaper Die Welt in 1976 printed an article with somebody that said, "I have a total irreverence for anything connected with society, except that which makes the roads safer, the old men and women warmer in the winter and happier in the summer, and the beer stronger." You all remember Billy Carter? Yeah, Jimmy Carter's beer drinking younger brother. He said, "Beer is not a good cocktail party drink, especially in a home where you don't know where the bathroom is." And Mark Hawkins in the New York Times in 1977 said, "Show me a nation whose national beverage is beer, and I'll show you an advanced toilet technology." Oh, can't get him to go up there. Jack Handy, who was a Saturday Night Live actor, he said, "If you ever reach total enlightenment while drinking beer, I bet it makes you shoot out of your nose, shoot beer out of your nose." And he said, "Sometimes when I reflect back on all the beer I drink, I feel ashamed. Then I look into the glass and think about the workers in the brewery and all of their hopes and dreams. If I didn't drink this beer, they might be out of work and their dreams would be shattered. Then I say to myself, it is better that I drink this beer and let their dreams come true than be selfish and worry about my liver. Now, the American humorist Dave Barry, he had several quotes. I can't resist reading them all. All other nations are drinking Ray Charles beer, and we are drinking Barry Manilow. Now, he was referring to the days before the craft beer revolution. He said, without question, the greatest invention in the history of mankind is beer. Oh, I grant you that the wheel was also a fine invention, but the wheel does not go nearly as well with pizza. He said, not all chemicals are bad. Without chemicals, such as hydrogen and oxygen, for example, there would be no way to make water, a vital ingredient in beer. He knew about the history of beer. When I heated my home with oil, I used an average of 800 gallons a year. I have found that I can keep comfortably warm for an entire winter with slightly over half that quantity of beer. David Letterman, on talking about humankind, he said, why we are here? Well, to tremble at the terrible beauty of the stars, to shed a tear at the perfection of Beethoven's symphonies, and to crack a cold one now and then. Tom Waits, the musician, he said, I'd rather have a bottle in front of me than a frontal lobotomy. John Goodman, the actor, comedian, beer is good food. And Greg Norman, the golfer, said, I'm allergic to grass. Hey, it could be worse. I could be allergic to beer. Drew Carey, things don't make me nearly as happy as talking and having a beer with my friends, and that's something everyone can do. And Conan O'Brien said the federal government is considering a proposal that would update the warning label on beer and other alcoholic beverages. For instance, one of the new warnings says, caution, excessive drinking could cause karaoke. Anybody ever watch the Inspector Morse series or read any of the books about Inspector Morse? The actor, John Thaw, played that. Inspector Morse was a great lover of beer, and he said, light beer is an invention of the Prince of Darkness. And in the book Real Beer and Good Eats, Bruce Idels and Dennis Kelly in 1992, they wrote, two of the more dubious achievements of American culture are white bread and light beer. So here's a little talk about styles of beer. I've already talked about ales and lagers and different names that go under those categories, and stouts and porters and milds and Bock beers and pilsners and so forth. Light beer came about in the little touch in the 1950s, but more so it was promoted in the 1960s and then up into the 1970s. Here in this country, it didn't happen elsewhere. It has since then, but it started here as a calorie concern, as a health concern. But until recently, most light beers didn't have much of a full flavor, so real beer lovers did not like them. Now we have non-alcoholic beers, and for many years, these non-alcoholic beers really did not taste very good. They tasted like unfermented beer. Beer before the yeast was inoculating those sugars that I talked about earlier in the grains from the barley. Nowadays, there are some fairly decent non-alcoholic beers out there that actually taste close to real beer. There's one made here in Connecticut called Athletic. There's one I know up in Maine we don't get here called Kit, K-I-T. And there are others around the world. The big international brewers are making them as well. But light beer was something people would love to make fun of, it goes back with a couple of those quotes. I love the one about an invention of the Prince of Darkness. Ray McNeil was a brewer up in Brattleboro, Vermont. He was one of the original New England breweries. He had a brew pub. He later in his career, he's not with us anymore, but later in his career with his brewery, put some things out in cans and maybe even bottles. And Ray said, beer is the reason we get up every afternoon. And you've all heard of Jim Koch, probably, or maybe you haven't. Jim Koch is the man who founded the Boston Beer Company in the 1980s, and I think it was 1984 or 1985. He had a master's degree in business from Harvard. I believe he also had a law degree from Harvard. He was working for a major consulting firm, making big bucks back in the mid-1980s. But his father and his grandfather had been brewers. His grandfather over in Germany before they came to this country. So he founded, in the 80s, the Boston Beer Company, which produces as their flagship beer, Sam Adams. And they quickly became the most popular and successful American craft beer that you could buy. It went past the definition of craft beer maker, which has been defined sometimes as under a certain threshold of production in a year. They were into the millions of barrels instead of the hundreds or maybe thousands. But Jim Koch was a forerunner of this, and he did it with his father's recipe from when his father had been a brewer, but lost his job during the consolidation of breweries in the United States after World War II. And what happened after World War II, and it happened in many other businesses as well, there was a lot of consolidation of many different businesses in many different sectors of the economy. And brewing, that happened there. The big boys kept buying up the little boys, putting them out of business, or just bringing their beers and their labels into their portfolio. So Jim Koch's father lost his job, and he was just horribly shocked when his son, Jim Koch, with this two great degrees and with this great salary up in Boston, said, "I want to be a professional brewer and open a brewery." Things like that did not exist in 1984, 1985. A little had started already in the late 70s on the West Coast. And there was a New Albion Brewing, and Sierra Nevada Brewing Company opened up by a couple of guys who before that had a bicycle repair shop. And on the East Coast, Jim Koch was the first. And he became phenomenally successful. He was the first American craft brewer to become a billionaire because of the worth of his company. He said that making great beer is like a seduction. Anyone can do it once. It's only when they want you back for the 100th time can you believe you're really good. There's an inscription at a brewery in Prague in the Czech Republic. The Czechs make really wonderful beer, lager, Pilsner-style beers. And there's a very famous brewery there in the center of the old city called U Fleku. It's just the U, the letter U, and then F-L-E-K-U, U Fleku, in Prague. And the inscription says, "Blessed is a mother who gives birth to a brewer." Stephen Wright, who is an American writer, he commented once, he said, 24 hours in a day, 24 beers in a case. Coincidence? And if any of you, looking around the room, some of you will remember the fabulous Furry Freak Brothers, the comic strip, rip-off comics. They said, beer will get you through times of no money better than money will get you through times of no beer. And let's see, I'm going to give you the last guy of the evening. I'm going to show you his picture because you just got to see his picture. Y'all know who knew that? Can I hook this up without unplugging everything? I think so. Oh, I can't. Oh, there we go. You see him? Homer! All right. That's Homer Simpson. Homer said, I've got 3 quotes from Homer. "I would kill everyone in this room for a drop of sweet beer." He said, "All right, Brain, I don't like you, and you don't like me, so let's just do this, and I'll get back to killing you with beer." And then he said to his son, a little parental advice, he said, "Bart, a woman is like a beer. They look good, they smell good, and you'd step over your own mother just to get one." Thank you very much. The floor is open for questions. Who must have a question? Yes, 2 hands right there. You go first, ma'am. All right. Of course you do. Yeah. Okay, you couldn't all maybe hear that. She said she doesn't drink a lot of beer. She'd never liked Guinness, but she just came back from Ireland. Now she loves Guinness. Vacation taste buds is the first part of the answer. You were in love with it over there. But it is a little different. Nowadays, the Guinness we get in the United States is imported. It is coming from Ireland. It used to be we got it from Canada, and I don't think they ever had a brewery in the United States. I'm not sure about that. I know they had a brewery in London. But there are several different Guinnesses for sale. You get draft Guinness, which is about 3.8% alcohol by volume. Very low alcohol beer. For a reference point, a standard Anheuser-Busch Budweiser, not Bud Light, but Budweiser, that'll be 5% alcohol by volume. So Guinness at 3.8 or 4.1% is very light in alcohol. It's not as carbonated, so it doesn't fill you up with bubbles so much. And it's using roasted grains. I mean, that might have been the flavor you didn't like in the beginning, because it's using these barley. I talked about barley coming from the farmer's field. They go through a process called malting, and you can put that in a kiln or an oven for a little time, more time, and you can get it all different color ranges and different flavors will come out. You put it in there for a long time and you get roasted barley. In fact, Guinness will use unroasted unroasted barley as part of their recipe. So you get that crisp. So why do you like it now? I don't know. but there are different Guinnesses. For instance, you get Guinness in a bottle here, and it will be Guinness Extra Stout. That's, I'm forgetting exactly, but it's like, maybe it's 5.8, 6.1% alcohol by volume. You can get Guinness Foreign Extra Stout. The labeling is just a little different. The graphics almost look the same, but you got to look for those specific wording. That's 7.1% alcohol by volume. So it doesn't taste anything like a draft Guinness you get in a pub. Yeah. So if you go to a pub where they keep their draft lines clean and there's no contamination or spoiling, you're going to get a really good pour of Guinness. It's going to be low in alcohol, as I said. And it's also low in carbonation, because one thing Guinness does with a natural pour, the way that Guinness has a very special tap handle that they use, where they're incorporating nitrogen from ambient air into the CO2 that was already in the keg. So you get that nitrogen creates very tiny bubbles that are soft and delicate on the tongue. So that's part of the taste appeal to it. Yeah. So there. Now, and I'll come to you after him.
My question was really about the history of it. I can't remember when it happened, but the craft brewing started. One of the biggest problems they had when we still have the nomenclature of malt liquor.
Yeah.
Advertised alcohol, and craft breweries were trying to fight that whole thing about malt liquor.
Exactly, yeah. This term malt liquor that he was referring to still exists. It's a category of beer in the United States, and it's really a very cheaply made product with a lot of alcohol in it. And it's, I mean, unfortunately, it is marketed and made for and advertised only in urban and low-income urban settings because of the high alcohol part of it. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, individual states could control definitions of beer, malt liquor versus ale versus lager versus pilsner, whatever, and they could control alcohol content in the products. So as you were saying, yeah, in some places they were calling it malt liquor. And in other places, you could make the same thing and not call it that, you know, if it's another state or another county or something. So it was in this country today, for people who make beer, whether they be domestic or whether they be bringing their beer in from another country, the importers, they don't have 50 laws for 50 states to go through. They have many more laws they have to figure out because, as I've said a couple of times, individual counties, individual towns and cities can set up their own laws for alcohol sales. So it's a nightmare, which has created a whole legal business for lawyers who just specialize in alcohol law. Yeah, it's quite complicated. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah, how do they make alcohol-free beer? Well, first of all, you have to be demented. Okay. And secondly, there are a few ways of doing it. One way is to not fully ferment the beer and take that raw product and not let the yeast go all the way through it and add in some hops and maybe some other flavorings. That's one way. There are other methods of stripping out the alcohol, which are scientifically technical beyond my comprehension, and I've read about it and written about it, and I still don't remember how they do it. But there are 2 or 3 processes where you can strip alcohol out of beer. But the easiest one is the first one I described, where you just don't let it ferment out with the yeast fully. And that's why they taste like unfermented beer, because that's what they are. Yeah. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, it's a travesty. He said in Germany you can find non-alcoholic beer. I know, it's terrible. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Right. Right. Yeah. As she was saying, her experience in being in Denmark and in Copenhagen and the breweries, it's true for a lot of the European brewers who are exporting to the United States. They would make a different beer with the same name to sell here. But that was back when they were told by their U.S. importers, their business agents here, no, the Americans are not going to want to drink your beer that way. It's too full of taste. You have to bring it down. Now, but we all know that this has all changed. All this changed in the 60s. You know, at some point in the 60s, we went from the homogenized food products that first were promoted in this country after World War II, and bland foods and white bread, sliced white bread that was very doughy and didn't have a lot of taste. And it happened with coffees, it happened with teas, it happened with breads, as I said, it happened with beer and a lot of other food products. Americans started to travel, and they would go to Europe and they would taste these things and say, or even Asia, wherever they went, and they say, oh, these products taste good, why can't we have this at home? So we had artisanal food and drink products started being made in the United States in the late 60s and all the ways up till today. And we know now the artisanal food and beverage market is huge in this country. But in those days, people thought, no, Americans want bland stuff. Yes? Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Coors, she asked the Coors question, and then she started out by saying it's probably light beer. And yes, regular Coors beer is. It's a American-style lager, which means it's light in body, light in color, not too hoppy, which means it doesn't have much bitterness to it. It's sort of what I was just describing. You know, it's like those beers like Bud, Miller, Coors, they're sort of the white bread of the beer world, okay? Just, it is beer, but there's not a lot of there. And they make some better beers. Well, when I say better, better is subjective. They make some beers that have more body and more flavor as well, not in huge quantity. But you're right, for a long time, they just didn't make enough beer to distribute on the East Coast. I remember as a child, my father saying, oh, hey, I got a friend, he can get us some Coors beer, can only get it out in Colorado, but he's got some. Isn't this exciting? We're going to have it at home. And, it was before I was of age to drink beer, but I knew this story that, Coors was only out there. All right, but that was the reason. No, they didn't have a distribution network yet to go past Colorado and the markets right around Colorado. It was really just business decision. Yes, ma'am, in the back. What's your name again? Oh, yes, Rachel. That's a good question. I know I haven't even looked for it for a long time. Andy, do you know? No. Bass ale was prevalent on the shelves when I came of age to drink. I was in England during my university studies. I saw it a lot, and I think they've just stopped sending it to the United States. It's probably, now that I'm talking about this, I'm remembering through the years I was reporting on beer that they were one of the English breweries that was bought out by some international conglomerate, and Bass sales just plummeted, and then they didn't pick it up again. Well, it was a good beer. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. He asked, how did Modelo from Mexico become such a hugely popular beer? Most popular imported beer still, I believe, in the United States. It is, again, like Bud Miller and Coors. It's a pale-colored golden lager. It is not offensive in its taste. It is beer, and it's made well, very good quality. But it's just very mild. And the reason why did it become so popular? Great marketing and advertising. You know, that thing with the lime in the bottle and all that. It just appealed to people so much. I'll get to your question just a second. But it brings up an history point that I think is interesting to make. I mentioned earlier about the huge wave of German immigration to the United States and Canada and Mexico. A lot of breweries opened up in Mexico, run by Germans. And they brought their brewing expertise and their scientific knowledge of how to make beer in the industrial age from the 1860s on. And so all the big Mexican breweries that still exist to this day, the big national ones and now sometimes multinational, they were founded by German brewers. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's also a marketing question, and you know, as he said, it has to do with Anheuser-Busch and their target audience and things they did in marketing. But Modelo was coming up even before all of the story that you're referring to. Modelo, and we have a huge, as we all know, a huge Hispanic population in the United States, and a lot of people from Mexico, and they want to drink the beer from their home country. Just like the Presidencial comes from, I think, the Dominican Republic, and that's popular with people who live here who come from that country. So those are some of the reasons why these brands have come up so much. Yeah. Yes, Melissa. Oh, did it really? Okay, yeah. She said that she's an editor of a beverage trade magazine, a friend of mine for many years, and she said, you said which one? Michelob Ultra has surpassed Modelo in terms of sales in the United States. She's more up to date with the stats than I am. Yeah. It's interesting how these things change. I mean, over the years that I was covering this on a daily basis, I was always looking at these numbers every 6 months or every year and saying who was on top, who was below. You know, it was a surprise to me at one point when light beer was more popular than regular full-strength beer. And then the imports, Modelo, as he mentioned, and now Michelob Ultra coming up. Yeah, which I always like to point out, Anheuser-Busch is a Brazilian company. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah, she was talking about that story she saw in the Times today about a consolidation of the craft brewing industry. They're being bought up by some of the big boys, as I say, you know, Anheuser-Busch or Miller Coors. Miller Coors is a conglomerate now, and South African breweries bought them. I mean, just it gets mind-boggling when you think about who owns who. And a lot of craft brewers, too, have formed little partnerships, business partnerships, so that they're in business together. So their supply chain, their ingredients, the raw ingredients they're getting, the barley and the hops primarily, they can lower their costs by buying en masse that way. So that's one thing that's happening. And then the other one was with large brewers buying up the small craft brewers. Sometimes keeping the product line intact and just as good as ever, and sometimes, so to speak, dumbing it down or canceling it. Yeah. More questions. We need a beer. I know that. The library didn't think with the size crowd we had, and they thought maybe there would even be more, that they just had the manpower to pass out samples through the talk, and they just got too complicated for them. So sorry about that. But if any of the breweries were open tonight, I'd say come join me at one of the breweries. But Nod Hill up the road, if any of you know Nod Hill Brewery in Ridgefield, their beer is really good. And it's a wonderful place to go for just the atmosphere, either outdoor in the beer garden or inside in the cold weather or at night, and live music. But they're closed on Mondays. And there's this new brewery, as I think some of you know, in Wilton, down in the shopping center. They're closed on Mondays, so they're all closed. Too bad. Otherwise, we'd go. All right, well, thank you. I'll have to apologize to the library for breaking their computer. I don't know. I was just pressing buttons. I don't know what happened. All right. Thank you all. Go home and have a beer.